Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film and this year's podcast media partner for the dCFF24 2024 Film Festival. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are talking with you could call them the star, you could call them the subject. I prefer the more personable response there, of one of this year's most exciting documentaries playing at dCFF24, Secret Mall Apartment. So we're going to kick things off by talking with Michael Townsend, who is the star subject. More on that in a moment. And we're going to learn a little bit about the story behind how Michael and his colleagues found themselves living in a mall for 4 years, and maybe a little bit more about what that space meant to them. We'll also cover how he collaborated with the director of Secret Mall Apartment, Jeremy Workman, to tell the story 20 years later. And then we'll close out the show by learning a little bit more about when you can watch Secret Mall Apartment at the festival and perhaps beyond. And before we get to introducing today's very special guest, I wanted to note that if you've enjoyed the show so far, if you're tuning into our exclusive dCFF24 coverage, or perhaps this is your first time, make sure to subscribe, leave us a rating and review. That way you can have each exclusive interview delivered to you on the daily. With that said, let's talk a little bit more about today's film, Secret Mall Apartment. So in 2003, 8 Rhode Island artists created a secret apartment inside the busy Providence Place Mall and lived there for 4 years, filming everything along the way. They snuck in furniture, tapped into the mall's electricity, and even constructed a wall, smuggling in more than 2 tons of cinder block. Far more than a prank, the Secret Mall Apartment became a deeply meaningful place for its inhabitants. And this documentary features never-before-seen footage of the space and reveals the identities of all the participants for the first time. I promise, Secret Mall Apartment is more than just a bonkers true story. I'm so honored and thrilled to be joined by, again, I want to call him the star, one of the stars of the documentary, Michael Townsend. Michael, welcome to the show.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, thanks for coming out to Oklahoma City. How was your trip in?
It was good. We got to do a 1-hour detour around a lightning storm, so I had a beautiful front row seat to lightning blasting in the distance while a child cried at my feet.
Just like classic Oklahoma.
Classic Oklahoma. And arrived and then woke up the next day and set off to do a bunch of projects in Oklahoma City because we absolutely love it here.
What are some of the locations? What are the spots that you've seen so far?
So far, we, as professional artists, our world is built around drawing with tape. So we do murals and collaborative drawing workshops, and we wanted to make sure that we hit the National Memorial and work with some students locally and get to a hospital. We've managed to check all those boxes in the last 2 days.
Awesome. And I know that I saw it right before we came to this recording, you're also working on a really stunning mural here in the Fordson Hotel at the dCFF24 hub for those people who were attending the festival, and shaping up to be beautiful. I was constantly just wowed. I'm like, wow, these people are using tape to draw. It's mind-blowingly detailed. But more about that in a moment. I do want to take us back to Secret Mall Apartment.
Yeah.
So this is such a cool story. I hadn't heard about it until the documentary, but then it's one of those stories when you hear about it, you're like, I think I've heard this story somewhere, right? It's got like an urban legend type feel. So you were one of the people who lived in the secret apartment under a mall, and you lived there for 4 years. I have to ask the question, how does one discover a place like that can go undiscovered by anyone else for so long?
This mall was the largest construction project at that time in Rhode Island's history. And I lived just a mere mile from it. When it was being built, I had, for a short period of time, taken up the grueling hobby of just running. Never done it before, but my path took me 3 or 4 times a week past the construction of this large building. I love architecture. I love exploring abandoned sites. And so I got to witness every wall go up. And as the skin of the mall started to be put on, I started to take note that there were spaces that did not make sense to me. They weren't parking garages, they weren't stores, they weren't storage. And I just sort of held on to that little bit of mystery. And several years later, it served me well.
So you're like, I wonder if anyone's in that space. I can't seem to figure out what it would be.
Right. What is that space? Like during the mall's construction, the space was used primarily to store materials. It's being built in a city, so there's not a lot of exterior space outside the the footprint of the mall to place materials. So you're building essentially straight up. So you have to have some platforms, places where you can pull materials from to continue your work. And it happened to be one of those spaces that was used. And then when the mall opened, forgotten.
That's pretty genius, though. I'll be honest. This is a genius thing where you're like, I know there's this space that no one else knows is there, really. So at what point did you and some of your friends or colleagues decide, hey, we should turn this into like a spot we can just hang out in?
Yeah, the film does a good job of answering that question. So the catalyst for why you would be driven to even explore the mall or ultimately make a home in the mall is answered in the film by giving a little bit of the history about the neighborhood that we had come from. A mile away is a bunch of industrial mill buildings. Myself and my art friends are all living in them. And that neighborhood has somewhere between 300 and 400 artists living and working in cheap industrial spaces. When the mall was built, that development project indicated to other developers that it was time to go. Tax breaks were available. The city was open for business. And they came to our neighborhood and they said, you know what? Here's some buildings we can knock down. In fact, we can knock them down and we'll build another mall, little strip malls. We'll build supermarkets. And most alarming to us was not so much losing our homes and our studios, but losing these historic buildings. To just demolish them to make parking lots didn't make any sense at all to us. And therefore, we spent years of our life fighting these development projects. And fighting means finding middle ground. We're not trying to stop progress. We're just trying to find a reasonable way to do it. You can save buildings. You can put stores inside of buildings. And that grueling process of trying to find that middle ground built the energy to want to become developers ourselves. And when we found that space in the mall, we had that energy. And we're like, okay, it's condo time. And we did our best.
You're taking it back, right?
We're taking it back. We're using the same language and vocabulary that those developers had been spouting for years, which is the idea that if you found an underdeveloped space, which is how they viewed our homes, you had a sort of moral obligation to make it better, to develop it, to increase the tax base, to have more offerings for the neighborhood. And using that same mentality when we found the space in the mall, we're like, oh, I see what we should do.
We're just going to do the same thing they're doing to our houses.
That is correct.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So stick it to the man a little bit. And
I want to say, like, not necessarily stick with the man, become the man. Sort of like,
yeah.
like just replicate the same sort of championed behavior that the city had sort of been applauding.
Yeah.
And say, okay, this is what we have green lights to do, and we continued with those green lights, but sort of pushed it into a space that people weren't expecting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really incredible. And it speaks to, it's a great way to hold a mirror up to the things that are happening and say, well, you said this, so we're just doing that.
Yes.
So, in terms of the amount of time you all spent in there together, it was 4 years. I imagine that had to take on a really important meaning, especially in that chapter of your life or period of your life. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that 4 years means to you in retrospect?
I want to say a lot that the director of this film, Jeremy Workman, was a choice for us. That means that when this project was discovered by the police, and then the press, and then the public, in that order, it became international news. And for a good 17 years afterwards, directors on a regular basis from all over the place would approach us and say, hey, we've heard about the story. We think it would make a great movie. And the thing they were most interested in was just the mall itself, the sort of like a prankish nature of it, the urban folklore of it. But in the background is a team of artists. There's 8 of us, and we're all collaborating on large art projects together, big, meaningful work, of which the mall is one of them. So in the background, we're volunteering at a local children's hospital, doing tape art drawings in patients' rooms and hallways and waiting centers. And the biggest project in our life is we're working on a September 11th memorial, drawing life-size portraits in tape of every single airline passenger and fireman that died at the World Trade Center. These are very intense, emotional art projects, and the mall is another emotional art project. So to contextualize that, to put all those pieces together, there were days that you would wake up in the mall, go straight from there to a children's hospital, work in cancer patient rooms for a couple of hours, and then retreat to computers, work on September 11th websites and processing the documentation from Manhattan, and then go back to the mall to sleep. And in all three cases, we're using art or artistic practices to sort of put a lens on these difficult emotional subjects and process them and get to learn about ourselves and how to just sort of, in general, just sort of heal in the best way that we knew how.
Mm-hmm. And not only healing for yourself, that is a big part of course, but you're also you're working on projects that are going to help the nation heal, other people, your communities heal.
Yeah. So there's a dichotomy here because two of those projects are very public facing. So we're talking directly to patients. We're working directly on the streets of Manhattan and talking to neighborhood residents. And then that third project, Secret Mall Apartment, is secret, as in we're not telling anybody. We have effectively a pact that only these 8 artists are allowed to go in that space. So the rest of my best friends never saw it. They heard about it, but no one was allowed to ever go there. So it became sort of a sort of safe space for us, a fun space for us, and a place where we could plan other projects from.
It was a bit of a safe space where you had this artists collaborating, bouncing ideas off of each other.
Yeah.
And like in terms of where you are today, how did that period really shape how you're doing art currently?
What it did for us is oh man, one of the lessons to answer that question is we have this secret project and we have this September 11th memorial project. They're happening simultaneously. The September 11th project took 5 years to finish. And so in 2006, we wrapped it up. It represents tens of thousands of hours of effort. And our intention with that project was that the public would see it and be able to sort of use it as a way to reflect on that tragedy and the amount of lives lost and the individual people who had passed away. We wanted it to be public facing and known. Secret Mall Apartment was to ever be private. In a strange exchange of fates, Secret Mall Apartment becomes international news, and the September 11th project disappears into nothingness, oblivion. When we finished that project shortly after, Facebook, Instagram, other sort of social media sites, Web 2.0 takes off. We put all the efforts into a version of the web that was destined to be ignored. And Secret Mall Apartment
takes off because it's got the word secret in it.
It's got the word secret in it.
It's like, oh, that means we're not supposed to know about it. I must learn all I can.
Everybody loves a secret.
Yeah. You talk about it being a secret safe space, but you did film things from hence the documentary. Why did you guys decide to start filming?
In our professional practice as tape artists, we draw on buildings with tape, and those drawings are designed to be temporary, which means that when we finish them, usually within 24 hours, we are tearing them down. I've done over 500 of those large drawings in my career. The first 150 or so don't even have photographs. So there was a period of time where we were like super ephemeral. Only when we made the decision that we have to start documenting did documenting become part of our professional practice. That means that regardless of how you feel, how willing you are to just be present in the moment, do your art and disappear, we are taking the time to take out cameras and take pictures. So with the Secret Mall Apartment, we're not documenting the whole time. There's only a short period of time somewhere in the middle where we're really ramping it up, where I was like, okay, fine. I'm taking out the camera and we're going to document the process. I am somebody who loves filmmaking, loves editing film. And so in the course of documenting, I am doing sort of the basic principles of getting as many angles as I can. I'm doing this naturally. There's not a lot of thought going into it.
Get all the coverage you can.
Get all the coverage you can. And in some cases, that means you're putting the camera down and letting it roll. In other cases, you are doing these really sort of intimate conversations from arm's length. This is during a time when self-documentation wasn't normal in any sense. If you acknowledged that I was holding a camera and pointing at myself, you wouldn't necessarily connect what was happening. And now it's very much obviously the norm.
I mean, because again, especially for some of our younger listeners, we're talking pre-smartphone, pre-camera phones, really even. I mean, it was a different world.
Yeah, pre good cameras. The camera we were using was one that had evolved from being able to shoot 15 seconds to 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And just when it breached into the shoot until you run out of memory card, that's when we started documenting. Yeah, so had Secret Mall Apartment started 2 years earlier, we would have been stuck with 60-second clips.
I can only imagine let's tell that story, piecing together all these 60-second clips, right? I'm curious, and I want to dig in this a little more, and I also want to talk a little bit more about your collaboration with Jeremy. But we talk about this, how it's sort of like an urban myth. How have maybe malls and these types of special spaces evolved since 2003?
Yeah, so this mall opened in August of 1999. At the time, it was referred to as the last super regional shopping mall in the United States, which means it's a big building. It's 9 stories high. It is, if you were to take all the layers of that, the layers of that mall cake and those 9 stories and spread them over downtown Providence, it would cover all of Providence. It's big. Malls now rarely are built that way. We are more interested in lifestyle centers where we acknowledge that we want the whole package. We want to live where we shop. We want to eat where we shop. And malls often look like towns in some cases. They blur the line between public and private in a way that's astonishing, where big regional malls, the public comes and treats them as public spaces, but they are perversely private spaces. There are clear rules when you walk into a mall that if you're not there to shop, they can just kick you out. They can make that decision. It is a private space.
All police. It's like they all have their own little police force running the mall. Yeah. So would you say in terms of how, the world has shaped up since 2003, because you were talking at the beginning of the interview about, the idea was that there's gentrification to some extent happening, that, the kind of historic space that you knew was being taken over by larger companies or larger malls. How do you think, in terms of, say you make this movie in 2024, how are things different?
Man, sadly, the paths of gentrification remain the same. And that's a pattern that I am hard to fathom is going to change anytime soon. And the path often is you have spaces that are underserved or cheap. In a lot of cases, artists are ones who move into those spaces because they are cheap. Artists have a tendency to be incredibly invested in the physical environment around their spaces and bring with them sort of a cool factor. They are, a lot of ways, sort of odd pioneers, where they're willing to go into spaces that don't have the luxuries of heat or conditioning or solid roofs and make the best of it. And as the story usually goes, those spaces then get identified by developers as cool, hip, or in some cases, just cheap. I've heard many, many narratives about developers who will intentionally find where the artists are living to figure out where they should put their next development.
Like targeted, holy cow.
Yeah. And I've heard that narrative many, many times. And every city has a version of this story. And in a lot of cases, it's neighborhoods filled with people who are underserved or just need cheap places to live. And it does not take much for a larger creature to come in and buy up those buildings and sell them to somebody else that's willing to pay more.
Constant cycle, and then
Constant cycle, and
driving the artist out, right?
And you have the artist out, and they get pushed to the edge, and they start over again.
Well, I want to bring it back to the movie.
Yes, please.
Which is, you worked really closely with Jeremy, and you just explained a moment ago how the footage was not exactly high quality. What was that collaboration process like with him? Because I also know that there were other people who asked you before to make this movie.
Absolutely. I mean, when this story broke, it was 2007, and of note, there was a writer's strike around the corner. So between 2000 and 2008, Hollywood was facing down this strike, and this story comes out, and we were relentlessly called. And we're talking 3, 4, 5 calls a day from different people in Hollywood looking for a movie, a book, a TV show, some sort of web series, anything. The slang that was used at the time was that the story had a bulletproof narrative. So that just meant that everyone could relate to it in some way. It would be cheap to reproduce. Were we on board? And the answer was no. Definitely not. The story garnished a lot of international attention, and we realized that the narrative, if left alone, might continue to serve the people who are getting something from it. And that remained true. The story continued to bump around the internet for 17 years, and we continue to get called by directors. We turned down north of 30 directors.
Wow.
Yeah.
That takes some real commitment to your position, which is we believe in preserving the story as it exists.
Yes, indeed. And it was easy to turn them down if they were missing the criteria for us, which was, one, we can't focus on just the mall part of this, because you have to answer the question, why? Why would they move in? 2, there's a lot of artists involved in this. There's 8 artists. So you need a filmmaker who's committed to getting all 8 voices and sort of showing the collective perspective. And then 3, we're all artists working on really intense other projects. And they're such an important part of the mall project and story, because everything else we're doing outside of the mall is informing our mentality. And Jeremy Workman was the first one who was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And he put the work in. He really did. He came to Providence, and he went and found the historians, found the people from Eagle Square, which is where the developers had come in and knocked down all the mill buildings with the artists in it, interviewed every single artist. All of them agreed to talk to Jeremy. He was able to gain their trust, which speaks a lot to him as a director. And I had given him the green light myself, because I had seen some of his previous work, and he specializes in doing movies about artists and making artists that are maybe a little eccentric, maybe a little obsessive, usually pretty kind, and making them accessible, likable even.
He had done, I think the last one he did was The World Beneath Your Feet, I think, or something along those lines.
And that's one of my absolute favorites. And he did Lily Topples the World.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Very
great
underrated.
movie.
Yes.
Yeah, great movie.
Oh man. Well, I'm glad to hear that he brought something to the table that others didn't, which was sounds like a genuine curiosity in why you all would have done that.
Yes.
And he, like you said, he put in the work. So that's often pretty rare. It's
super rare. And he's an interesting director, because he seems to be somebody who's interested in the minds of artists. Lily Topples the World. He's looking at the world's best domino artists and asking, why, Lily? Why are you so good at this? What possesses someone to set up 60,000 dominoes and then just knock them down? And the movie's colorful romp. It's great.
Well, Michael, I know we're about out of time, but I did have a couple of final questions here for you. Number one, you talked about how you'd gone to the Oklahoma City Memorial. Maybe talk with us about some of the work you've done here in Oklahoma City, more specifically during your time.
Sure. In order to put it in context, I have to share that in 1995, sort of near the beginning of my traveling career as a tape artist, myself and my tape art collaborators had set up a national tour. So it was going to be 40 states in 6 months. We were going to drive to each state, knock out a mural in each state, tear it down, move to the next state. That had us coming through Oklahoma in mid-April in 1995. And
well, ideal time in Oklahoma history. So for listeners who are not familiar, that is when we experienced the mural bombing, unfortunately, in downtown Oklahoma City.
Yeah, we were here for an arts festival. The Alfred P. Murrow building was bombed. It was a couple blocks away from the arts festival was going to happen. And the arts festival had to make the decision about whether you send home hundreds of artists, whether you take away something so joyful and so much a part of the city's history. And they made the painful decision to cancel that festival so the focus could be exclusively on the rescue operation that was happening at the bomb site. Now, that said, our tape art is a medium that is very good at responding to things in real time. And our coordinator, Peter DeLisi, recognized that we could do tape art in hospitals. So he plugged us into hospitals, as hospitals serving children that had been pulled from the blast site. And we did work in individual rooms, doing murals on request, giving patients a chance to sort of tell us what to do. So we would draw on the walls in those rooms and give them a sense of control. We then did work in 2 schools that were in Oklahoma City, doing themes about recovery, giving the students an opportunity to reflect on the tragedy that had happened. And at that point, Peter DeLisi and the city manager recognized that we might be a really good fit for the rescue operation itself. And so they got us permission to go into a space that was under martial law. It was in the Myriad Convention Center, which is the building across from the Botanical Gardens. And the wall they gave us was 3 stories high.
Wow.
And it was right next to the one gigantic metal gate that they would open to let the rescue operating teams go to the blast site to do their work. They were working on 12-hour shifts. So every 12-hour shifts, the group would go out and another group would come back. The mural that we made was a 58-hour effort, which means we worked on it for 58 hours straight. And the reasoning behind that was, one, in that environment, we're kind of the lamest thing in the room. It's just we're 3 artists surrounded by people whose lives are dedicated to saving other lives, and
which are also very important.
We are important. Yes. We come to sort of recognize our value during the course of this mural, and the rescue workers tuned us into that because they'd be going to the site and be very explicit about the idea that while they were doing their work, they were thinking about the mural, and they're excited to see the progress of it when they came back. Thus, working on it for 58 hours straight, because every 12 hours, you have people saying, we look forward to seeing this thing evolve. And the mural was an ode to them. It represented in sort of an illustration of life-size characters building wings, tying feathers onto wooden infrastructures, and then tying them onto people to cast them into the air. So the top 2/3 of this mural is just filled with these sort of angelic characters flying about. And the rescue workers saw that as a great illustration of teamwork and collaboration, setting people free, and the sort of angelic overtones. And it was a fascinating real-time memorial. The work was not torn down. It was the first tape art mural that was not removed 24 hours later.
Incredible.
It was left up for 1 year, and then we came back and removed it. So all that context is to say that the National Memorial, which is a museum here dedicated to understanding and contextualizing the bombing in 95, hosted us for 2 days. We did a small mural in their education center. We met with their historian to do the oral history of our time in Oklahoma City in 95. And today we gave a presentation on art and healing. And then while we were in town, we also did a mural at St. Anthony's and worked with some local students.
Well, thank you so much for your huge contributions. And that's why I want to say you are important, especially when tragedy strikes having people who kind of provide some color, some air, a way to dream of something that's different than the situation is extremely valuable for the recovery. And so you being there at that very pivotal moment in Oklahoma City makes you a part of the history here.
Yeah.
So we're so glad that you returned to us to talk, to show the movie, but also just to revisit some of these valuable locations.
Yeah. And in that movie, there are some scenes from our time in Oklahoma City.
Wow.
So
I haven't seen the movie yet.
Okay.
I'm greatly looking forward to it. So the credits on this film roll, right? Secret Mall Apartment, it's done.
Yes.
Lights start to come up. What do you hope audiences take away?
I have had the pleasure of doing a few Q&As already. This film premiered at South by Southwest, and that was the first indicator to myself and some of my peers who came to do the Q&As that the film was doing a good job of getting people to think about what is art and what can art be. And the types of questions people were asking were incredibly thoughtful. And we're like, okay, good. This movie will continue to do our work as art educators, as art enthusiasts, without us being in the room. And it's a little bit shocking to see ourselves on film and to see things that were so private being shared publicly. But what takes the sting off of it is that audiences seem to be reacting really well and really thoughtfully to what they've just witnessed.
Well, it goes back to that original idea you were saying. The reason we didn't let someone make it before was because you wanted to preserve what this meant to you. So it sounds like you're able to sort of pass that baton on to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and we can't we can't thank Jeremy enough for putting the effort in to plant the landing on that and make it a document that hopefully will inspire others to allow art to be a part of their lives. And if the film can do that for even a few people, it's well worth it.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait to see it. One of my most anticipated of the festival this year. Last question, and we've been asking every single guest this on the podcast this year. What is your favorite film going experience? Could be a movie, but also it could just be the experience of watching a movie with people who matter to you.
Oh, gosh. I will say, as someone who loves to drive, like, the car I'm in right now is just crossed 470,000 miles.
Holy cow.
They're all tape art miles. But occasionally we will pick a location for a film that's very far away and then drive to it. Doesn't mean the film was good, but we'll go to it. So driving from Providence, Rhode Island to Texas to see The Phantom Menace.
Wow. Cross country for The Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace. We wanted to go to the one of the first megaplexes in the United States. So we wanted to go to like a place that represented large movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so we headed there. I remember driving from St. Louis to the Mall of America to watch Independence Day.
Oh,
I believe that was in 96.
Yes.
I remember driving
just to see the White House blown up,
just the White House blown up. Driving from Providence to the capital of Newfoundland to watch a Quentin Tarantino film. So I love using movies as an excuse to get on the road and drive around.
I love that. That's going to be, I have never had that answer before. I love it. I have to ask, you drove all the way from Rhode Island to Texas, Phantom Menace. Did you enjoy the experience of watching the movie?
Yes. I enjoyed the experience of watching the movie because emotionally we had no choice.
So, you're like, I must love this movie.
I have to like this movie. Otherwise we're wasting our time, people.
I could talk about Star Wars, another podcast. Where can people keep up with you and all the great things you're doing with your tape art online?
Sounds good. Our website is tapeart.com. On Instagram, we're just at tapeart. So if you have an interest in the work we're doing, that's where we sort of do our best is to share what we're up to. And in the next couple months, we have a tape art toy that we worked on during the pandemic.
Wow.
And it's a handheld projector that can throw an image 3 stories high.
It's made of tape?
It's an actual projector, but it fits in your hand. You can put 35 millimeter slides in it.
Yes.
And we're making custom slides that people can use to either just become agents of light chaos or use them to trace and make their own awesome tape art murals.
I'm going to have to get one of these.
Yeah,
I'll tell you what.
It's very cool.
You bringing back the slideshow in the best way. Michael, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And listeners, again, if you're catching this, the film is screening today, Saturday, June 8th at 7:30 p.m. at Harkins Bricktown Auditorium 11. And there will be an encore screening scheduled for Sunday, June 9th at 12:30 p.m. at the First Americans Museum. I highly recommend, I haven't seen the film yet, but I can tell you I'm enthusiastic, and you get to hang out with Michael for a couple hours. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? This is a
we'll be there.
All right, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you again next time.